Oh, okay, so it's a good evening from me. A lot has happened in sport since the last video I uploaded. I do apologise for not uploading more content. I have actually been battling this horrible virus that's been going around, and obviously I had a very busy Easter period. So now that we got that out of the way, let's get on with some of the sports news. So Paul Ince has been sacked by Reading. This is obviously following an eight-game winless streak. They've now slipped into the relegation zone in the Championship. This is also following on from their points deduction of 6 points. Had they not had that points deduction, they're not in trouble. But I think Reading could be staring League One in the face, and that would be disastrous for Reading Football Club. Scunthorpe United have been relegated out of the National League into National League North, so their downward trajectory continues. The West Tigers in the NRL have now lost 6 matches to open this current season, which is just dreadful. And the question marks continue to abound about the direction the West Tigers are taking. The NHL have now confirmed the dates that they're going to be going to Australia. That'll be the 23rd and 24th of September. And the Arizona Coyotes will be playing the LA Kings in Melbourne. The arena has not yet been specified by the NHL, but they've now confirmed that they're going in September, not October, which means they will not be clashing with the AFL or NRL grand finals, which means they can attempt to at least maximise the potential audience that they can get domestically in Australia. Plus, obviously, it would have to, as I said when I did the video a month ago, it would have to be Pacific Division teams, and they've gone with the Kings and the Coyotes. Whether that was the right decision to go with those two teams is another thing. But there we go. There is a domestic league in Australia, and Australians have played in the NHL. There's one active Australian in the NHL who's won a Stanley Cup. 2 Australians in total have played at the NHL level. The Australian Ice Hockey League is not on the European lower level standard. It's semi-professional at best, is the best way to describe it. But I think with the amount of US and Canadian expats over in Australia and the US population, especially with military personnel in Australia, I think um, that's a fair. There's a fair North American population and business interest there. But also, I think the NHL wants to get into a market before other major leagues do. We know Major League Baseball has taken games there. We know the NBA has a big following there and may potentially take games there. We know the NFL has a roadmap for um, various regions of the world with their international series. So the NHL getting in there um, before Major League Baseball decides to do a return visit, I think, is important. Um, and look, we'll see what happens. Why Australia and why now is an interesting one. It has sort of, it's not, I wouldn't say a bad decision. I wouldn't say it's the top location I would take the product to. But in saying that, you know, um, the NHL obviously wants to grow its global appeal, and the Australians are sports mad. Now, I think the issue that the NHL is going to face is Australian spring. Now, what we saw in the pre-season games for the NRL, at least, and I think to a certain extent the AFL, was some of the temperatures they were playing in at the end of their winter. Well, no, the beginning of their winter, should I say, their autumn period. They were in the high 30 degrees Celsius range, and that is a potential that we could see as very high temperatures um, at that time of year. Very, very high temperatures. And that is an issue that the NHL and the arena, whatever arena or stadium they decide to play the games in, has to deal with. Um, but the Australians are sports mad, so and the fact that they've got one of the teams is from LA, I think that's going to have a massive impact. Arizona not so much, but LA I think is important because of the cultural significance. The LA Kings in the 90s was sort of fashionable to wear LA Kings apparel. My brother is not an ice hockey fan. He's got an LA Kings, the old Chevy symbol kind of hat. So there is that kind of societal, cultural kind of aspect. To get the if the LA Kings wore a retro jersey, for if they come out with like a new third design for next season, it's a retro design. That could be fantastic. If they're it's new, if they say it's a stadium series kind of pre-season and they design special jerseys for it, that could be absolutely fantastic. Um, but they do have an ice hockey league there, and the Australians are sports mad. So I don't see it being a bad thing, but it's not on my like top five locations if I was the NHL trying to do overseas games. But clearly, the teams and the players with the CBA that was negotiated during COVID and the renegotiation of the TV deal and the CBA as it currently stands are happy with this. If they weren't happy with it, they wouldn't be going. So there is that. Yeah, Scunthorpe United, yeah, their downward spiral is continuing, which is a big concern for the Iron. And this is what happens when you have a badly run football club. And that there are some concerns about the long-term future of Scunthorpe United as things currently stand. And this is not the first time a football league club has fallen out of the football league and really, really gone tits up. Um, that's quite interesting. Yeah, that's what the fact that well, arena operators are trying to make doesn't matter if it's swindling it with the Link Centre, which is an older facility, or even a more modern football stadium being energy efficient, for example. Um, Becoming more energy efficient with the rises of costs over the last couple of years, although fuel costs are predicted to fall and fuel prices are predicted to drop. It's a no-brainer to upgrade facilities. This is where like there's the Basingstoke Bison Arena being they're not playing next season. They're not icing a team. The future of the entire complex is in that base. There is arena and stadium maintenance is vital, and there are some stadiums and arenas, not just in this country but globally, that the owners have neglected to upgrade or maintain properly. So the fact that they're taking the time to upgrade and improve the facility is a good sign. Um, would I consider going to NFL and Major League Baseball games in London? The expense, the cost. I've looked at the cost and I can't justify it. I could just about justify going to the Rugby League World Cup semi-final, but in the end, the weather was a bit naff that day, and of course it was on a weekend, so transportation, is a nightmare at the best of times, and that was back in November. Cost, I can't justify. I mean, if the channel was making enough money, actually making an income, and I didn't have to do my daytime job anymore, and I could earn a decent income off this platform, then at some point, yes, absolutely, I would happily want to experience an NFL Major League Baseball game in London. The issue that I have is the transport links. I don't drive, and I've given up riding my motorbike. So at the moment, I'm relying on purely public transport to go from where I live through central London into north or east London, and that is a massive undertaking. The last time I went to a sporting event in London was in 2017, and it was a mammoth day, and it wasn't. I mean, the game itself, the tickets weren't expensive because it was an ice hockey game at Streatham, but the transportation and food and drink costs were just extortionate because it's London prices. So that is something that I think puts off a lot of people. Um, and you know, I, and yeah, so because I'm reliant on that public transportation to get to and from Wembley or the London City Stadium, um, that would be prohibitive at this time. And with the ongoing uncertainty around strikes and engineering works overrunning and delays with infrastructure projects, and without my pay rise with my current employer being finalised, that is an expense right now that I can't justify. I can't. So there is that. But if the channel would not only become self-sufficient but actually could earn enough income, then it's justifiable. But then if the game is on a weekend, which is a big problem, It's not getting to London that's the problem. It's getting home. So there is that. Um, Absolute United. That's another team that's not too far from where I live. That's another reasonably local team to my area. That's a fantastic achievement. Hopefully, they can also go up the pyramid. I mean, Maidenhead United is another one of my local clubs. I would like to see them make the football league at some point. So there we go. We've had rail strikes down here as well. We've had last month the rail line, or 2 months ago, the rail line that I live on was closed for a whole week. There was just no trains at all, and that was for engineering works. So yeah, getting to and from places was a bit frustrating. And at the time I leave for work in the morning, there's no trains and no buses on the train line and the route that I live on at that time. But I get the train home in the afternoon. And so, yes, I do commute, not every day, but some days, depending on where I finish and all that. And yeah, it is frustrating. So if that was to happen, we've seen strikes with sporting events before, deliberately timed to cause maximum disruption to embarrass the government, basically. Um, it is what it is. Why did I give it up? Oh, I had a bad accident. Well, I had a few bad accidents, and then while I was recovering from my last accident, the 2021, the price of fuel went through the roof, and I'd not been at work for 2.5 months. And then when you after a period of time you go on statutory sick, and it doesn't pay the bills, so I just didn't have the money to fix it, and yeah, so. But in the summer of 2021, you would have noticed I didn't do any content for 2.5 months. Yeah, I was recovering from a motorcycle accident, and I think that has actually harmed the channel's development. I think I would have been monetized had I not had that crash, or had I, even when recovering from that accident, not had the other health issues that went with that and the other complications that went with that. So yeah, I gave it up. I I do miss having that extra mobility, but I can't afford the extra cost, because even now, with fuel prices being lower than what they were pre-accident, no, sorry, lower than what they were when I was recovering from the accident, they're still higher than what they were pre-accident. So I can't even justify the fuel cost. My wages haven't gone up. So I don't miss the cost of operating a vehicle, taxing, insuring, fueling, repairing. It just got too much. Notts County to get 100 points and not possibly go up. This argument's been had about the National League and the Football League promotion relegation structure with two up, two down. I think Notts County will win the playoffs. They will win the playoffs, but they're too good a team not to win the playoffs. Wrexham and Notts County are so dominant in that league. I can see them both going up and then staying up. Yeah, the debate about should three teams go up, two automatic, should three teams go down, or maybe four teams go up. It will be interesting if that does get discussed around the Football League and National League tables, and whether there's a discussion about amending the structure of the promotion relegation structures that we have from the Premier League all the way down. I think that's a fair debate. How easy to get to Wembley? From mine, Wembley itself, you've obviously got Wembley Stadium, and that's right by the tube station. There's a rail station as well. It's not bad, but it's not as good as other stadiums, let's say like Twickenham and the London City Stadium at Stratford, or uh, the Arsenal with Emirates Stadium, with the Emirates not too far from King's Cross. There are other stadiums in London that I think have better connectivity. The Valley has pretty good connectivity, which is Charlton's ground. Um, Fulham and Chelsea and Brentford have really good connectivity with the local area as well, with the transport links. I think Crystal Palace actually have quite, not too far from a rail hub as well. Other clubs in and around Greater London seem to, I think, and other facilities seem pretty well connected as well. So, obviously, the O2, the former Millennium Dome, literally has an underground station there as well. So, it, so it, the Oval cricket ground, I think, has got better connectivity to major transport links than Lords, for example. So, it, the transport infrastructure in London. I mean, I've got books in transport history. I'm a bit of a railway nerd. And the railways are written around London and the bus routes, the old trams and all that have drastically changed since the 1950s, 1960s. Massively changed. So, and now we're counting the cost of reducing rail infrastructure, and now we're trying to add it back up again at greater cost. So yeah, it's a bit of a pain there. Um, should the National League be brought into the Football League? That again is a debate that the EFL and the National League, and even the Premier League and the FA need to have. Um, it's a big debate that needs to be had. Whether it's the right decision or the right choice is another thing. Most of the National League clubs are professional, and there's a fair few in North and South that are pretty much professional as well. So there is that argument to do it, but yeah, and there are professional players in the non-league below that on professional contracts. So there is a growing economic argument um, to do so. And there's some good talent that's in the non-league as well. Um, that some of these players who are younger players could play in the football league, and there's obviously those ex-football league players who decide to drop down a division or two to further their careers. There's some good quality play being had in the lower levels, so it's a feasible argument. But you've got to weigh up the pros and cons and look at the state of club finances. And I will tell you now, club finances aren't as rosy as a lot of people claim they are. There's a lot of clubs throughout the footballing structure, from the Premier League down, they're in all sorts of financial mess. Hi Dan, how you doing? Yeah, good to see you. I know obviously I haven't been. I could have done. I mean, I got in late from my mum's on Easter Day. I had a big hearty roast dinner. So big eye meal at my mum's on Easter Day. And I didn't get in till late, and then I had my neighbour over for a quick cup of coffee. So I was zonked on Sunday. I could have done a live stream on Saturday, but I wasn't feeling very well. Um, I'm still not feeling great now. The weather hasn't been great. We've got weather warnings for strong winds and heavy rain. There's a potential for flooding. It's great. um, but no, I hope your work's going well, and yeah, so it's good to see you. And then obviously at some point I will look into some more the major leagues in North America, like Major League Baseball and the NBA and the NFL, and do a little bit more NHL content because the playoffs are coming. And only three Canadian teams have made the playoffs this year. So there is that debate of when will the next Canadian team win a Stanley Cup. And could Toronto, Edmonton, or Winnipeg do it this year? And that's an interesting one. It would be brilliant if there was an indoor arena near Twickenham. Oh, they used to have Earl's Court, and that's now gone. Um, it would be nice, yes. Um, Unfortunately, you've got to maintain that arena. It's not, this is the problem with sports facilities. They've got to be maintained, and they've got to be cost effective, and they've got to make money. Some stadium and arena operators are operating some of their facilities at a loss because it's all well and good having that indoor facility, but it's got to be used all year round, even when the particular sports that it may be set up for aren't using that facility. That's the problem. This is why I think basketball hasn't really kicked off in this country, and why ice hockey has had its struggles in the UK over the years. Um, and you you've got to look at the operating costs for an indoor sporting facility. It has to be profitable, really, for the arena operators. I think that's what ice hockey I think does better than basketball, for example, because you can do ice skating in the summer, and when the matches aren't being played, you can still have ice skating and figure skating training, and you can lease it out and things like that. But this is another debate, and we've seen football and rugby clubs, for example, their stadium running costs have become ruinous. Look at the Wasp situation. at Coventry. That stadium has been a money pit since the designing stage. It's almost bankrupted Coventry City. It's bankrupted Wasps partly. So even the higher professional levels of sport, look at Valencia with their stadium build. It's taken the best part of 20 years. They've never finished it. Um, so it's an interesting question. It would be nice if there was a more suitable indoor arena um, closer to West London, for example, or South London, where there's more rail links rather than underground links, like Croydon with the tram system. That would be fantastic. Um, but I think Wembley Arena is getting old, and the O2, formerly the Millennium Dome, has also had its detractors and issues over many years. There's some positives to it as well. The connectivity is great. The Cockbox Arena is fantastic. Um, Yeah, I mean, it's great that they got these proposals, and Leeds as a sporting city has done a lot with Headingley, the cricket and rugby league and rugby union grounds. Headingley, that facility, is fantastic. The Headingley Sports Complex is fantastic. There's been a lot of work done in there, a lot of development done there, and it's shown a lot of benefits for the local community. The ice hockey arena has obviously been built in recent years, just before COVID, and that's had a net benefit as well, and the team's doing very well. So Leeds has put a lot of investment into sporting facilities, not only for the professional side of sport, but also for the everyday um, user, to use those facilities when matches are on, and be involved in the community. So the ice rink, the Headingley redevelopment, um, that's fantastic. Um, Obviously, it's a proposal. Leeds City Council obviously will have the planning applications department. They'll obviously have to sign off on it. But the Leeds Rhinos, Yorkshire Carney, and Yorkshire County Cricket Club, as a collective of sporting, clubs there, and then of course the Leeds, is it Leeds Knights Ice Hockey, um, and of course their owners and the arena operators, they've put in a lot of capital into this and proposals into this. So a lot of private money is being spent. That's the important thing. This isn't taxpayer money. It's private money being spent there, which is important. Um, and I think it's benefiting the city of Leeds. I think maybe Leeds United could look at expanding Ellen Road, for example, and that could be another bit of investment. Um, so there is that. But again, it's like Croke Park with their indoor facility for some of their Gaelic uh, athletic sports is being delayed with its final opening for handball because of the COVID pandemic, and that's taken a lot of investment and time in Dublin. So sometimes these things overrun and cost more than intended. Yeah, the Wembley Arena, the old Wembley Arena was dreadful, and that was well in need of renewal, and they did renew it. But Wembley Arena is not. I mean, Wembley Arena and the O2, which is formerly the Millennium Dome, to older viewers. Younger viewers will go, "What's the Millennium Dome?" It's the O2. They're over 20, I mean, the Millennium Dome opened in 1999. That thing's nearly 25 years old, and it's gone through several phases of development inside and refurbishment inside to the facility we have today. Um, but yeah, 20 years ago is a long time. Technology moves forward, building materials move forward, building standards change. The habits of sports fans or arena goers or concert goers change. And you look at NBA and NHL arenas in North America. The Saddle Dome is ancient by arena standards. Nationwide in Columbus, which is where the Blue Jackets play, is old. That's over 20 years old, nearly 25 years old now. Um, they're really old arenas. And then you've got Madison Square Garden, which is the current Madison Square Garden, was first built in the 60s. So that just tells you what you need to know is like very often arenas don't last very long. They get replaced and renewed. The fact that Madison Square Garden is still going is ridiculous. Um, my thoughts on the final 10 stadiums for the Euro 2028 bid. I'm surprised like the stadiums like Old Trafford aren't there, and some of the Premier League. stadiums, aren't there? Some of the stadiums that were on the list have now been dropped. I can understand why Croke Park has been dropped, um, and why they've decided to go with the Aviva. That was a big thing for the GAA back in the mid 2000s to allow the rugby union and football teams to play at Croke Park at the time. And they had to amend the Gaelic Athletic Association governance to allow that to happen for that window of time that the Irish Rugby Union and the Irish FA were tenants basically of Croke Park. They had to amend their sporting constitution to allow that to happen. And obviously, the FA of Ireland and the English FA and the Scottish FA and the Welsh FA, all the various FAs, obviously, because it's a joint bid, and of course the Northern Irish FA, all basically saying these are the stadiums we want to use. Two of the stadiums haven't even been built yet. One of them is Everton's new ground, and of course you've got the new development of a GAA stadium in Belfast, and that is very, very interesting. Is that a GAA stadium will be used if this bid is successful? That is what is generally interesting, but not Croke Park. So it's an interesting one. I think Croke Park is the better stadium over the Aviva. That's personal opinion. But is it suited to actually football though? With how big, how far a football pitch, an association football pitch, is different to a Gaelic football pitch. Gaelic football pitch is actually wider. An association football pitch is narrower, so actually you're further away from the stands. But I think the fact that they've decided to reduce the list of 14 to 10 is interesting. I don't think it's a bad thing. But I think looking at it objectively, I mean, Turkey is the other bid, and Turkey's also bidding for 2032 as well. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with that. For me, it's well conditioned for Leeds. The Leeds are, of course, obviously that's to do with the proposal of an indoor arena attached to Headingley. AFC Wimbledon nearly moved to Dublin. That would have been ridiculous and would have not happened. So they didn't nearly move to Dublin, and that would never have been okayed by the Premier League and the FA. I'm not sure how the Irish FA would have felt about that as well with their domestic league structure and how that would have devalued the Irish domestic league. Right. What are we talking about? Qualification automatically? Should it? What are we talking about? Who qualifies what? In regards to the co-hosting, um, they would have to change the qualification process, or it will be in a further expanded tournament, which I think would be an expanded tournament to 32. To have 5 co-hosts has never been done before, so that would say to me that if that does happen, UEFA would expand the tournament. And I think we eventually will see the Euros be 32 teams because the current structure with the Euros, with the best third place teams qualifying, it's crap. We all can agree that just doesn't work as a the size of the tournament now doesn't work. It hasn't worked for 2 tournaments. Fans aren't happy with it. The potential for match fixing. It didn't work in the World Cup format, and it doesn't really work for the Euros either. So I can either see them expanding the Euros basically for a co-host like that. But it's an interesting bid that it's a multinational bid as well, with multiple FAs involved. We have the sporting infrastructure to do it, basically. There's some of the stadiums on the list are massive. Some of the stadiums on the list are some of the biggest stadiums in Europe. I am surprised, however, with the omission of some of the stadiums. And 2 of the stadiums that they're proposing to use aren't even built yet, and one of them is a GAA stadium. That's not even been signed off on the planning permission yet. So, in that regard, there is some risk to the bid, And again, um, we shall see what happens. And of course, in the background of all that is what happened at the Euro 2020 final as well. That I think will have a bearing on whether UEFA accepts the bid or not. Um, Obviously, with a lot of the media backlash against UEFA over many, many years, and FIFA, a lot of it from the British media, that might have a part to play. And of course, then the fact that six of the clubs in England were involved in the European Super League. So we'll see what happens. UEFA stated that the women's Euros will stay at 16. The talent depth is not there to expand past that. I think that's the right thing to do. Otherwise, you'll see so many lopsided scorelines. It would look really bad for the women's game. I felt the last women's Euros was pretty good. There was a couple of blowout scorelines, but not many. And England dished out a couple of those blowouts, which is really interesting. Um, so I think UEFA are right to do that at this time to keep it at 16 for the women's game. It mitigates the risk of very lopsided scorelines in a more competitive tournament because the talent depth is not there yet in the women's game in comparison to the men's game, which has been established as a top level sport for 140, 150 years. So, with that in mind, I think that's the right decision with where the women's game is currently at. And there'll be those who will complain about it, obviously, and there'll be those that will say there's too many teams, and there'll be those that constantly drag their knuckles in regards to women's sport. If you don't like it, don't watch it. Quite simple. There's a thing called a TV remote. There's a thing called you know, for streaming online. You can just go to the other sport you like. Don't have to watch it if you don't like it. This is what I don't get with people who continually criticise women's football, women's rugby union, women's rugby league, women's cricket, women's ice hockey, women's basketball. If you don't want to watch it, why are you complaining about it? You hate it that much. Why are you taking the time to complain about it that much? It's a no-brainer. Don't like it, don't watch it. It's quite simple. Um, I mean, I'm not out there saying we need to cancel comedians or people like Piers Morgan. I don't like Piers Morgan, hence why I don't watch his programming. I don't like Frankie Boyle or Jimmy Carr. I just don't watch them as comedians. Simple. There'll be those that do like that kind of content. Fine. The CONCACAF Gold Cup cities have been announced: Toronto, Arlington, Charlotte, Chicago, Cincinnati, Glendale, Harrison, Houston, Inglewood, Paradise, St. Louis, San Diego, Santa Clara. I'm seeing one Canadian city there. That surprises me with the fact that Vancouver's got an MLS team, Montreal's got an MLS team. One Canadian city, really? And I'm seeing a fair bit of the west coast and southwest of the US. So I'm seeing a big shift to the south and west of the US there as well. Arlington's in Virginia, Charlotte's in the Carolinas, Chicago's Illinois. I think women's sport is generally well received in the UK and Europe. In the US, there seems to be a real hatred of women's sports. No, I've seen it a lot from UK's British sports fans as well. I wouldn't say there's a general hate. I don't know what it is, but I think Twitter has allowed the the knuckle draggers of society, the best way to describe them, and the ill-educated, or the ignorant, I think is a better word, to have a very loud opinion, which, if they were in school or at work, they're laughed out the room. Okay, they're on social media, so all the idiots have this anonymity where they're just on a keyboard, and we've brought up a generation of people who don't know that there are who haven't been taught there are actions for consequences of action. Where if you back in the day, if someone gobbed off at you, you got a smack in the mouth. Now they have the safety of sitting in their mum's basement or the spare room with a laptop, um, in their mid 40s, um, in a string vest and their Y fronts, slagging off an 18, 19-year-old female football player or a 22-year-old female basketball player who's far more skillful than they ever were at school. Um, there you go. And so we've also brought up a generation of people of participation awards where everyone's a winner and no one loses, which then perpetuates this type of moronic behaviour where there's no consequences for their disgraceful actions. It's quite simple. Um, people, ugh. But that's my view on social media and then the current society that we have today. We need to get rid of these participation awards. And yes, the taking part is important. I was always told take part is important. It's part of development. You learn how to lose and how to win, how to develop. Um, you can't win without losing first. Let that sink in. You cannot win without having at least one defeat first. You have to understand why you lost in order to win. Too many people now have had these participation awards at school, and no one's a loser in the sports. The second egg and spoon race, we're all taking, and it's just like, hang on a second. One kid won that egg and spoon, or one kid won that 100-meter sprint, or the javelin, or the discus, or whatever sports day event you won. The other 9, 10, 20, 30, 40 lost. They have to learn how to deal with defeat or adversity in order to develop as a human being. So let that sink in. American sportswomen seem to be quite outspoken and confrontational. A handful of them are. I also think that's how America is. It's loud and shouty, and other people's opinions don't matter. Americans come across as very, very, very not good at discussion and debate. They like shouting at each other. They're very loud. They're very in your face anyway, even if their opinion is complete and utter barmy, nut job levels. I found that with Americans, they are very, very loud. They are very opinionated, and they're never wrong, apparently. When actually, quite often, they are very wrong. But don't tell an American that they're wrong. Because they don't like it very much, especially when they actually are. Like, I've got so many books in history where Americans just look online at some of the dumb stuff Americans say online. It's just hilarious. Or actually on camera, in person, they come up with some. Not all Americans, but there's a significant proportion of Americans who really they don't travel often outside their own country, let alone their home state. 60%, or is it 60 or 70% of Americans don't have a passport? Uh, out of out of those that do have a passport, I think about 60% have never travelled outside the US. And out of them who have travelled, very few have travelled outside their home state apart from maybe an educational exchange trip when they were in their late teens, early 20s. So they're not a very well travelled nation, really. Their athletes are the ones who seem to travel abroad. And a lot of them are athletes because they had sporting scholarships, so they're not actually very articulate. So they just shout a lot, and they can't take criticism. And it's the same with male athletes as well. I've noticed. I'm not very. I know Dan, who's a moderator. He is American, and what I've noticed is that there's a slow but surely growing number of American sports fans who are willing to listen and learn and develop as people and absorb the information and be willing to go, Christ, we are wrong. We're not the best at this, and they're not. They see Americans think they're God's gift to the world because their media tells them they are. Their education system tells them they are. And in reality, outside of America, everyone else just goes, what? Because Megan Rapinoe, I cannot stand her. I understand her views on minority groups and fighting for better rights. I get that. It's the way she goes about it, and I think she's the wrong spokesperson for her movement. There are other women's players within the US system and Canadian system, for that matter, who would be much better spokespersons for the causes that they're trying to fight for. Also, her mathematics doesn't add up as well, but that's another thing because Americans aren't very good at educating their young people. Megan Rapinoe, I think, is the wrong person for the to advocate for better pay and better working conditions for women's footballers. She's also a massive pain in the arse, and is quite an intolerable person because apparently she can't be wrong. She's wrong quite a lot of the time. On the same token, there's a lot of male athletes who I can't stand from the US as well. There are some who are exceptionally talented and very humble individuals, very down to earth. There are others who just the amount of NFL players I look at their antics off the field, and I mean, if they were doing that in Europe or Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, some of the other English-speaking countries around the world, for example, maybe in mainland Europe as well, they are doing hard prison time. Their careers are done. No other sports team will touch them with a contract. Um, yeah, so I really, really, at the end, this is one of the reasons why I don't like the NFL and I don't like Major League Baseball is the athletes who participate in those sports. A lot of them, not all of them, are really not great ambassadors off the field. Um, they are dreadful ambassadors off the field. So there you go. The American basketball players who go to play in Turkey or Serbia must be brave as that. Anyone who goes over to the Balkans to play professional sport who's not from the Balkans, you either got a screw loose, um, or you're willing to a take a massive pay cut and b be willing to possibly get shot because violence and intimidation is what the Balkans does very, very well. And I've been to the Balkans. The people are nuts, like banana. So I I um I was in Croatia like what 14 years ago on holiday, and drove through Croatia. Got to Split, which is the second city in Croatia. And you see this from the motorway. You see the Hajduk Split Stadium, which is a fantastic stadium, by the way. It's breathtaking, fantastic facility. And in order to get to the Adriatic Islands, you've got to take a ferry. And 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'm not joking about this, I went to a little cafe, 24-hour cafe, 24-hour cafe barista kind of, little bar cafe thing, 24 hour. And I just wanted to grab a coffee and some pastries, just a light Mediterranean breakfast, which is generally a small little espresso and a couple of sweet pastries. It's a general little light little snacky type of breakfast before you do stuff. Three old, I would say middle aged to older. These are sailors. These are guys who are fishermen. These are work they work or they're dock workers. They're out the front of the cafe little bar at 6 in the morning, and they're not having pastries and coffee. They're drinking hard liquor at 6 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of summer. So it's not cold. This is like it's already 25 degrees at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they're drinking hard liquor 6:30 in the morning. So yes, the Balkans they are built differently in the Balkans. Yes, and their sports stadiums doesn't matter if it's football or basketball or handball or ice hockey in some parts of Europe. Yes, their fans are lunatics, and it's a completely. I mean, we think our football fans and our rugby league fans are a bit nutty over here in England or in the UK, like Scotland, for example. You go to mainland Europe, especially the further east you go, the more intense the fans get, and then you've got that hooligan element as well. And there's a lot of politics and ethnicity behind it, and some of it's really nasty. Um, but I look at it and it is absolutely ridiculous. Some of the footage you see on YouTube or on TikTok or on Instagram or videos that have been taken inside a basketball arena or an ice hockey arena or in a football stadium, the Americans aren't used to that. They think our sports culture in like Scandinavia and Northern Europe is this is mad. Then they get onto hardcore Central Eastern Europe, continental Europe, because I see Scandinavia as almost like a similar to us but a little bit different. Then they get into a place like Germany, Austria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, and then you get into like places like Hungary, Croatia, Serbia. It's something else. It is something else, and it has to be a culture shock. Has to be. They're not used to that kind of intensity with like fireworks going off and basically riots in the stands and big flags and banners and the tifosi kind of atmosphere of the Italians or the ultras, the ultra move. They're not used to that. This has got to be something to them that is a massive culture shock. And a lot of American athletes, unless they're taking part in, let's say, the stadium series for the NFL or the NBA series, international series, they're not going to be exposed to that at all. The NHL players probably more so because a lot of them are European. But when it comes to the NFL and the NBA, and the NBA's got a fair few European players, predominantly from Central and Eastern Europe, who do play in the league. That's got to be a massive culture shock to the uninitiated. What you see on the internet does not replicate what actually happens. Okay, in game, in a stadium, in real life, in the flesh, just doesn't come close. And okay, yeah, most European stadiums, not all of them are massive. They look massive on the camera angles, but in reality, they're not as big as some of the NFL stadiums. The atmospheres are three times as good, and this has got to be a massive culture. So yeah, I would say not only are the crowds intimidating, but it's going to be a culture shock. The way of life is intimidating. The amount of Americans who really can't cope with European life, they're like stunned. They assume everything's 24 hour, which is not. That's one thing that gets them is like weekends. We have half days if you're working. Sundays, quiet. Roads are nice and quiet. You can go for a walk. They expect everything to be on their doorstep, which is not. And they expect stores to be. So if you're an American athlete and you come over to the UK or mainland Europe to, play sport, you are in for a massive culture shock when the wife goes, goes out and goes, oh, I couldn't get anything in shops. What? Shop shut. Or it's the opening hours, they shut 4 hours ago. Well, it's not 24 hours. It's a culture shock. And some parts of Europe, they shut down in the daytime, like Spain. Middle of the day, they shut for 4 hours. France, they shut for 2 hours. Italy, southern Italy, they shut for 2, 3 hours. It's too hot. Greece, it is a massive culture shock, especially to younger athletes who go over. I don't think they're fully prepared for it. They're really not fully prepared for it. It really is a shock to their system, which is probably why we don't see a lot of American football players or rugby players or any athletes coming over. Even though the growth of rugby and the growth of football, association football in North America in recent years, we're not seeing those players come the other way. Go, okay, we've developed our skills, and a lot of those American players that do come the other way either have a parent or parents who were born in Europe. Pulisic, his family are of Croatian origin, I believe. Brian McBride, I think one of his parents was of Irish heritage. So they have that link, that direct link with Europe. But a lot of them, they've never, until they hit the professional level, they've never left their country. And a lot of them, I think are in for a culture shock. So I think when America co-hosts the World Cup with Mexico and Canada, they are in for a massive shock when European, South American fans descend on the US and Canada en masse, because the Mexican fans are just mental. They're Latin American, but I think the Canadians and the Americans are going to be absolutely stunned by the atmosphere that the European and South American fans are going to bring to the World Cup when they co-host it. I don't think they're fully prepared for the energy levels and the intimidation of the fan and the atmosphere the fans bring. I think it's going to be an education for them. So that's going to be interesting. But yes, I think I've got a bit too long on European crowds. Konstantin Diakis, the elbow. We'll see what happens. Considering what happened to Mitrovic and the fact that the FA are wanting to extend appealing his 8-game ban, they want it longer. and looking at what Di Canio and Prussian did in the past and how long their bans were, that's players attacking the official attacking the player. Um, I think this is going to speed up the introduction of the referees being fully mic'd up, so everyone can hear what the players are saying to them. I think this is designed to reduce dissent. I think that's what's going to happen in that sense. I mean, I remember Kalina once punched a player in the chest. He was giving him a lot of gob, and he went, "I'm not having this," and he hit him. And no one messed with Pierluigi Kalina. Um, and he was an intimidating referee that you didn't want to get on the wrong side of. Very good referee as well. Obviously, we see with I mean, look, we've seen it in football for a long time, where the players crowd around the officials, and now we're starting to see it in rugby league a little bit more. We are starting to see it in professional ice hockey a little bit more. So where like the Premier League and La Liga and all that, with the constant intimidating of the official by the players and the crowding around and the hassling and quite open abuse and dissent. We've seen that for a long time, and I think there's got to come a point where we need to stamp that out. Um, Other sports, it's starting to become an unfortunate part of the sport, which I don't like. Rugby union, it started to happen as well. And I think this is going to be the moment where the FA and having the video cameras on, fully mic'd up, where we, the TV audience, and maybe the stadium can hear as well, much like rugby union, much like rugby league and ice hockey and these other sports. They mic the officials up fully, and then very, very quickly. They also need to be much, much tougher on verbal, abuse towards an official and dissent. Dissent is I'm just going to move the laptop quickly because my back has gone again. Oh, I love having a bad back. It's fun. Yeah, I think this is good. I think what comes out of this, I think I think the official he's in trouble. There's no denying. I think he's in a lot of he's in deep shit. I think it's the nice way to put that. He's in a lot of trouble. But I think this has got to spur the FA on to bring in um, body cams, bring in not only miking the refs up with the other officials, but fully mic up the officials where we can hear what they're saying to the players, what the players are saying to them. Because very, very quickly, I think you'll see um, players abusing the refs. Yeah, they're going to get lengthy suspensions when that goes out live on broadcast. Um, this should have happened years ago in regards to body cams, rugby league and rugby union and even cricket, ice hockey. They are well ahead, and these are sports with less money. Let that sink in. Yes, the NHL is a billion, I think it's worth $5 billion US in income pre-COVID. That's what it's worth, right? As the top league, they far ahead of where the Premier League is. The Premier League is worth more money than the NHL. Football is worth rugby union and rugby league far less economic value than association. That they're much further ahead in firstly protecting the officials, and secondly disciplining players for you know doing so. Football constantly lags behind in areas where wealthy sports but are less wealthy. Other sports are further ahead in a lot of areas, and football is stuck in the 1950s, in my opinion. Um, do I think Man City need to win the Champions League this year? Man City have got a lot of other problems rather than just a Champions League title. With that ongoing investigations, if they do win it, they might get stripped of it. So I think Man City need to clear their name first off the field before they win a Champions League. Yeah, footballers, cricket, and rugby players, yeah, I do agree. They're not saints, absolutely. We've seen so many players or athletes in a variety of sports not being particularly nice individuals. And this is where professional sport is not developing the human well-being aspect of developing these people to be good humans and good role models and educating them and guiding them in the right way. So I agree with that. They need to introduce press conferences for referees to explain the decisions. The Brighton game was just, the VAR official has now been. He was meant to referee a game, I believe, and he's been dropped for this weekend's fixtures. I heard that the fact we see this in the NRL a lot, where the head of Graham Annesley is his name, and he's the head of officiating, and he has to constantly come out and give a press conference and basically say we got it right, we got it wrong, and if the head of the referees was to come out and regularly give press conferences, um, it's this debate has. I mean, I watched the Under the Cosh YouTube channel, their video podcast. They've had some ex-referees on the Under the Cosh podcast. Now, obviously, the colourful language used is hilarious, and some referees are characters. But that question was raised: should referees have to give a press conference post-game, or the officials, or the head of the officiating for whatever league? So, the Premier League, the League One, Championship, whatever. I think mm, it's a double-edged sword. There's some pros and cons for that. But then you're going to get some very awkward questions when they say one thing, but then the PGMOL go against that. So I think the PGMOL need to be the ones giving the press conference following the weekend's fixtures and explaining each game and going, this is why, this is the match report, this is why the referee and that, and let's say Mark Clattenburg is an ex-referee or Howard Webb, right? At the moment, it's Howard Webb who's the one having to go, oh, God, we screwed up at the moment. But the fact that Brighton have had 3 games where you could argue refereeing the blunders, and lots of them have possibly cost them points because they've still got to score the goals. They've still got to beat what's in front of them, even with a crap ref. The fact, however, that the PGMOL has had to issue 3 formal apologies to Brighton Hove Albion does suggest there's possibly a bias against them. For what reason? And this is a club that's trying to chase silverware and trying to chase a European place. Has had 3 matches potentially decided by dubious officiating or just poor officiating, raises questions. Lots of questions. And now we're seeing an official in hot water for elbowing a player in the head. This is where I think we need to have either the head of officiating or the head of the PGMOL coming out and saying, or giving a breakdown of the weekend's games, going, right, here's the match reports. And this is how we've rated the officiate. But then you've got to be careful because then you're grading the referees. We're already seeing problems in retaining and developing referees from grassroots up. That referees are leaving the game in droves. So I think it's a double-edged sword. I can understand the reasons why people want to ask the referees a lot of questions, but then the spotlight's on the referee rather than the game. That's a bad sign when the referee becomes the centre of attention, or the linesman or the VA. When they are the ones becoming the centre of it, it's not a good look. But I can understand Brighton's frustration that three crucial games have ultimately been impacted, not decided, but impacted by poor refereeing or poor officiating, I think is the better way to look at it. Which, that could be 9 points that has been impacted. That's an 18-point swing, basically. Because that could be 9 points if they could have won, or that's 9 points because they've lost those games or drawn those games. That's drop points up to. That's an 18-point swing. That's massive. Massive. Can you imagine if they won all those three games where they've had to be issued an apology for poor officiating? They could be in the top four, and that is no joke. They could potentially be in the top four with that 18-point swing, and that is ridiculous. And this is whether Brighton go on to win the FA Cup now, just to qualify for Europe that way. But this is the importance of it is that is the potential of a Champions League spot, if not a Europa League spot, guaranteed, that they could potentially miss out on because of refereeing errors. And then we could argue the same for like Leicester or Everton or Southampton at the moment, or Leeds or West Ham or Bournemouth getting relegated because of a blunder with a VAR decision or in a game where a player gets unfairly sent off, or a penalty's badly, or a penalty's given, or an offside that shouldn't have been, and then a goal is scored or a goal is not allowed as a consequence, which ultimately in that one game. But then you've got to say whether they could have won the previous 30 odd games. There's a reason why they're battling. But this is the argument is what happens if this happens in the FA Cup final? That is the one-off game. Or in next season, the League Cup final or the FA Cup final. One of those two. One of the cup finals, the playoff final. What then happens when it is that one-off game where it is winner takes all? There is no replay. So let's say the fourth round of the FA Cup onwards, there is no replay. It's a winner takes all situation, and a refereeing blunder or blunders contributes. Otherwise, let's say it could have been a 1-0 to Brighton. They lose 2-1 because of two erroneous penalty decisions, which shouldn't have been. Where then the following day, the PGMOL or the FA has to issue an apology, or the head of refereeing has to go, yeah, we got that one wrong. We screwed up there. That shouldn't have been that. And I use Brighton as that example because they're in the FA Cup semi-final in a couple of weeks. Can you imagine the fallout? Or let's say the Man United beating Newcastle, obviously in the League Cup final. Let's say that was 1-1 going into the last 5 minutes of the game. There is that penalty or free kick that's given that shouldn't have been. Just can you imagine the fallout from that? That would be the question of the integrity of the referees then, and the transparency of the referees then would come into question. Refereeing blunders with their eyesight is one thing, but when they get it wrong with the VAR, it's not acceptable. I think the remit and what the wording behind the VAR and what they're looking and not looking for. If you have to draw lines, and it's like we're talking my big toe, which is like what? That big, right? That's like your big toe is like, yeah, big toe is that big, right? If we're talking 2, 3, maybe 4 inches or less, so we're talking centimetres or millimetres offside, that's not clear and obvious. They need to change the wording of the rule book because VAR doesn't work with the interpretation of handball and offside. It doesn't work. It doesn't. It can't. The way the laws are written down, it cannot work because accidental handball in the box is meant to be an indirect free kick. And when was the last time you saw an accidental handball in the box that was given as an indirect free kick where every single player's got to stand on the line, including the goalkeeper? It's in the rule book. They haven't taken it out of the rule book because accidental handball in the box by the defending team is still an indirect free kick. No referee's got the bollocks to award it. Go to VAR, it's got to be a penalty. Well, it's not deliberate. He hasn't stuck his arm out. He's falling. He's not looking at the ball. It strikes him on the arm. That should automatically be an indirect free kick from that point. So VAR can't work because VAR go, that's a penalty. So yeah. And on offside, the interpretation of offside has changed from season to season for the last 30 years. I have a book somewhere in my collection of books. I think it's at my mum's. And my dad brought me this book. So my dad was sports mad as well. And it's actually a simplified version of the footballing laws, basically aimed at kids and teenagers and also trainee referees to a certain extent, and the amateur game, to give you a basic understanding of the rules of the game. And it also puts some fun historical facts in there as well. It was a fun book. And it was printed in 1992, and this is when the Premier League comes around. And this is when the back pass is taken out. Because before you could back pass to your goalkeeper and you could pick it up. That was the last season you could do that was 91-92. Pass back to your goalkeeper and pick it up. They took that out of the game. They took that out of the game. And that was still in the rule book until they said that is no longer allowed. What it says about a shirt pull, automatic yellow. Dissent, automatic yellow. Foul and abusive language towards the referee is an automatic red. Diving, automatic yellow. Accidental handball in the box, which has not changed, is an indirect free kick. Who knew? Also, they now got the uncontested drop ball. Bring back the contested drop ball, please. It was kind of fun watching two fat, middle-aged blokes in League One kicking lumps out of each other in the middle of the field, trying to punt the ball down the other end of the field. Quite fun. So some of the rules have gone completely or changed completely, and others have evolved. VAR can't cope with that. I think they have to go back in time to the early 90s rule book, apart from the back pass, because I hated that slowed the game down. I wanted to speed the game up. That was something that came out of some of the World Cups. The 1990 World Cup, for example, was very defence orientated, and FIFA wanted to speed the game up. So VAR doesn't work with the current rule, but VAR might have actually worked with the old interpretation of handball and the old interpretation of offside. I've got to find this book. If I find this book, I'll go through it, and it does clearly state what the interpretation of offside is back in 1992, and it is completely different now. Clear gap between defender and attacker. Clear gap. So I think they need to roll back the rules to the 92 part of the back pass. And suddenly VAR will suddenly work a bit better. But it's been badly implemented, badly used, and it's so inconsistent. It's so many blunders, not only this season but almost every season. And the refereeing staff, referees now are like, we're going to rely on VAR to make a decision. Or constantly refers to video. Burnley back promoted back, but they've also got a transfer embargo at the moment. So whether they actually can make a fist promotion because their finances are under scrutiny. And that's to do with the leverage takeover by their ownership group, which is similar to Man United. I'm not pleased. Blackburn can possibly make the playoffs. We've done our best to confuse ourselves this season because we've been in the top three. At one point, we were top. We've dropped as low as 8th and 9th. We've been in the playoff. We got back 4th. Then we were 3rd at one point. We have been all over the place. Since that loss to Sheffield United, our form has dropped off again in the FA Cup. And we've only got 5 games left to pull our finger out and try and do something. And some players are not performing. Simple as. Was it last season or the season before? Our best of the player of the season was Kaminsky, the goalkeeper. That tells you the problems that Blackburn have had for a significant period of time. Is the goalkeeper is regularly voted by the players and fans as the best player. When your player of the season, when voted for by fans, members, players, and club staff, is your goalkeeper, that tells you something. If it's one of your central midfield players or a defender or a striker and outfield player, that's different. And especially when it's a central midfield player who's a two-way player, that's generally your hardest working player, plays the majority of it, that's fine. When it's your goalkeeper, that tells you there's problems there. So, but I think we're still better. We're playing better than we did last season. We're just not consistent enough in the second half of the season. First half of the season, brilliant, and then we decided to stop playing at times, then start playing again, then stop playing. Although our form has improved, there was that period for about 2-3 months around Christmas, New Year, which we do every year, where our form just like we shit ourselves and we're just smearing it all over the place. That's Blackburn for you. Big Blackburn fan. I think where we are is about right. If we make playoffs, I think that is about right. We're not promotion material yet. I think that would be more harm than good. I think Thomason, we need to give him a bit more time. Yes, that will be a massive game changer. Well, BT Sport's going anyway. That's been bought out and merged and changed into TNT. BT Sports is going. If they ditch Sky Sports, that is a massive momentum shift in the direction of sports rights in this country. Massive. They're thinking about being a streaming service in. Now, I will say this. The NRL, I obviously subscribe to the NRL website and the AFL. I don't subscribe to the AFL website yet, although I might do in time. Not only can I watch the games live, but if I miss a game, like tomorrow I'll be at work, so I'll be missing. I won't be able to watch the game live in the NRL and Friday because I'm at work. I can watch those matches later on a playback service with the ads taken out, right? It works out. I get not only all the men's games in the NRL, I get all the women's, the NRLW. I get all the state of origin, both men's and women's. I get some of the internationals, mid-season internationals, which are fantastic. I get all the related programming, or majority of the related programming, not all of it. And it's all in one package. I get more programming out of the NRL website than I would on Sky Sports. And it's not overly expensive as a subscription, really. It's 140 quid a year at the moment. It was when I first subscribed, it was 120. So it's gone up a fair bit in the last few years. However, they froze the price for a while. It wasn't too bad. Then it's gone up by 20 quid in total. It's still £140 for a year. Let that sink in. 140 quid for a year. The Premier League are considering their own streaming service. Now, I don't think Amazon will get the full rights because that would drastically impact the value of Amazon Prime, especially as Amazon are cutting employee numbers right now. That would be a bad look for Amazon to do that and would hurt their bottom line. But the Premier League has to be careful. Look what happened to the pay-per-view fiasco in 2020. That was a fiasco. The last time before that they had a pay-per-view, it lasted a season. We've seen the collapse of ITV Digital. We've seen the collapse of Setanta. BT Sport is getting bought out and sold off by the BT Group. They have to be very, very careful how they deal with this. Viaplay, which is Premier Sports and Viaplay, is the new version of Premier Sports, doesn't have at the moment the financial muscle, and it has grown rapidly, but the financial muscle to get in there. They have to be very, very careful. They get this wrong, it could be catastrophic. Now, the overseas rights, make a lot of money, but if they get the domestic rights wrong, could have dire financial consequences. Look at the French league; they've lost their domestic broadcast partner completely. There's no money in French football. PSG have ruined the league completely, and the domestic TV deal collapsed during COVID. If the Premier League get this wrong, they are in trouble. Massive trouble. No free-to-air broadcaster has enough clout by themselves to pay for the rights. Now, if several free-to-air broadcasters come in with multiple bids for games packages, could be worth some money, but I think a mix of free-to-air streaming and subscription TV would be a desirable option. We've seen the viewership figures on free-to-air for club football, pretty good. We'll have to see what happens. But this could cost the Premier League more money than the current TV deal. This could actually cost them money. This could hurt their bottom line. It could hurt the value of clubs, and that could ultimately impact player wages. If clubs are making less money out of the TV deal, can't afford to pay their players. Transfer fees will be worth less. This could actually have massive implications on club income and expenditure. And a lot of clubs, ironically, are operating with a lot of debt. So if the Premier League goes down this route, this could actually massively backfire, massively. And Just look what happened with ITV Digital. They signed up for a TV rights deal they couldn't afford, and it nearly bankrupted, I think, 14 football clubs. Setanta did bankrupt football clubs. Just let that sink in. So I don't know who would take over. Who would actually have the financial clout to fill the financial void domestically? Because it has to be a domestic deal. The overseas deals are pretty strong. The domestic deal is where they could lose a lot of money, which would ultimately, yeah, have a knock-on impact. I do cite the collapse of ITV Digital and Setanta as examples where, okay, it's not the whole deal, but it's part of the deal. Losing that income and reducing the income ultimately sent clubs into administration and ultimately failure. Um, do I think Wakefield Trinity Wildcats will get relegated? It's possible. They've not been a good side for a long time. They've been struggling in the Super League for a long time, treading water. The fact that the clubs that have got relegated were the newly promoted sides those seasons, or in Toronto's case, when failed, has saved Wakefield from the drop. And yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, but I think they could. I'm not saying they will, they could. Um, while the streaming services show sporting events, Viaplay is the one that's growing rapidly at the moment because of its affordability, because of its accessibility, because Viaplay as a website bought the TV company in Premier Sports. Um, they're the ones that are growing rapidly at the moment, but they don't have enough financial muscle behind them to fill the void of um, um, of Sky and BT. I wouldn't say I'm not popular in Burnley. I've got viewers in Burnley, um, and I say I say this. I mean, the viewers I've got in Burnley. I mean, I don't know how many, but I know I've got viewers in Burnley. And I know I've had comments from Burnley fans on the channel. Um, but yeah, so there is that. How popular I'm, I don't have a clue. The fact I'm a Blackburn fan probably doesn't go down well in Burnley, but as I said last season when they got relegated, I think it was a shame. The fact the rivalry was reignited this season was a good thing for the derby and the rivalry and the history and the sport. It would be nice to see Blackburn Burnley in the Premier League again. Um, that could still potentially happen. Obviously, the playoffs have got to be played and teams have got to qualify for said playoffs. Um, and I did feel that sacking Sean Dyche was the wrong decision. I think he could have kept him in the Premier League. Now, obviously, Vincent Kompany's had a very good first season with Burnley. He's got them back at the first attempt. The real challenge is, can you keep him in the Premier League? So there's that. So we'll see what happens. It will be interesting to see what happens with the Premier League TV rights. Obviously, the last bout of negotiations, Amazon came in. And now we know about BT Sports continuing woes the BT Group wanting to shed the loss making BT Sport and BT Sport being rebranded and bought by Warner Brothers um, Discovery to merge with Comcast, which is TNT, which is interesting because they pulled out the US sports market, but that's another thing to do with regional broadcast rights and in the US different. But BT Sport's been hemorrhaging money for a decade. They've been losing rights of a lot of sports for a little while now. Sky Sports, I think they're starting to feel the pinch of the cost of living crisis, the rising costs, some of their commercial and operational decisions they've done since Speed Sky being bought by Comcast, American owners. Um, um, again, we'll see. But Amazon obviously came in to buy a little segment of the domestic market. Now, Amazon may grow their segment, but with Amazon basically saying that they're laying off staff, if they were then to come in and increase their percentage of Premier League rights when they're laying off staff, that doesn't look good. So I think Amazon might be a bit cautious about their next move on a PR standpoint. So yeah, it is what it is. I don't know. I think the TV rights, I think, has plateaued at the moment. I think it's plateaued. I don't think they're gonna. Is the next round of negotiations is not going to be a big enough jump. It's grown massively and started slowing growth, and I don't think we're going to see much more. And with BT's, but look, we don't know what's going to happen with the restructuring that's going to happen with what was BT Sport when it does change hands, and the restructuring of that network. And with Comcast's continued restructuring of the Sky Sports side of the Sky group of TV channels, what's going to happen there? And with the continued growth of Viaplay. So we'll see. Who broadcasts the French League? Amazon have a handful of games, and Canal Plus have a handful of games, and we're talking 10 live games a season domestically in France. 10. My most disliked teams, Burnley, PSG. I don't think so. I think you got that one wrong. Obviously, Burnley, there's a rivalry there with my club, but it's not actually my most disliked club. I dislike the owners of PSG and their ownership model, but I don't dislike the PSG history or anything like that. They've had a great history over the years. Bayern Munich, I don't hate Bayern Munich. I just think their dominance has unfortunately had a negative impact on German football. But they're not my favourite German club, no. But I don't dislike them. I think having this channel, I think, has made me. I still have my passion for rivalries and stuff, but I would say Barcelona and Real Madrid are probably on my list of clubs I don't like, and Juventus than those three. But yeah, that's an interesting one. I could, but there are certain teams that I have a little soft spot for that I want to see do well, even if I don't support. That makes sense. Would be a better way to look at it. And to be fair, even though Burnley are my club's biggest rival, I do like seeing Burnley and both Blackburn do well because I think it's healthy for English football. If it weren't for clubs like Burnley and Blackburn, we don't have the Football League. I hate Juventus passionately, but I don't want to show that bias when I do the review videos. I really dislike them. A lot of football fans really dislike Juventus. To be fair. Barcelona and Real Madrid, a lot of football fans are growing to dislike. It's not the players that play for them. It's not the fans. It's the club structure and it's the club owners and it's some of the dealings that Juventus have done, and Barcelona have done, and Real Madrid have done. Is what makes me dislike them. Not the success they've had on the field. It's what they do off the field that really irk me. But I also don't like Juventus anyway. I've never liked Juventus. I'm an Atalanta when it comes to something. I don't have a soft spot for Cardiff. I've just done a lot of videos on Cardiff. I'm not a massive fan of Welsh teams, to be brutally honest. But I do have a soft spot for Wrexham. But I'm not a massive fan of Welsh sports teams. But I want to see Wrexham get back to the Football League because I think that'll be a massive, massive story when that happens. The internet will explode and Ryan Reynolds will be and Rob Backerman will be hailed as gods, given freedom of the city. Middlesbrough is ridiculous. It's so congested. It just shows how mad the Championship is. Yeah, Burnley have run away with it, but the relegation battle's ridiculous. The promotion battle is ridiculous. It's just a ridiculous league. It's a cutthroat league, and it's bizarre. it's bizarre how that league functions, and I don't think the championship functions in a healthy way either. The club finances and some of the issues that a lot of clubs are facing in the championship financially, and those struggles are. 4 clubs have got transfer embargoes. Um, Wigan are about to go completely out of business. Huddersfield nearly went out of business. The championship business model is not. It's a mess. Yeah, I think Wrexham. I've now got them the momentum over Notts County, but I think Notts County get promoted as well. Um, well, when we're looking at like disliked clubs, I think it's I. Here's the problem I have. Some of the clubs I don't particularly like, players have played for them that I like. That makes sense. I mean, when some of those clubs you've listed, I I like some of the players who've played for those clubs, and I would have them in my fantasy 11 or my all time top 100 players that I've seen play. Um, I mean, I don't mind Celtic and Rangers. I dislike Rangers more than Celtic, and it was to do with their policy of not signing Catholic players until the 80s. It had to be a Protestant. So they fueled further sectarianism at a time when there was massive social divides in this country, and there still are. Um, Liverpool, I've been my first ever game was at Anfield. A lot of my friends and family are Liverpool fans. There is a proportion of the fan base that brings the club down. Um, they get a lot of media bias in their favour, which is frustrating. Um, but I would say I dislike Manchester United more. Just saying. Arsenal, I don't dislike that much. I actually don't mind Arsenal doing well, ironically. Um, and again, some of my favourite players have at times played for Arsenal. Olympique de Marseille. I think there's that the early '90s corruption scandal and has tainted the club absolutely. Um, that is where a lot of French fans and European fans. Um, I can't dislike Scousers. My dad was one. My granddad was a Scouser. I've got family from Liverpool. No, that's thinking. Um, my granddad was born in Liverpool. I have a connection to the northwest. I can't dislike Scousers. I just dislike sections of Liverpool and Everton's fan bases who are very toxic and bring those clubs down. The fact that Everton is run like a shit show is another thing, and the fact that Liverpool don't help themselves with some of their antics either. Um, I know I don't mind. I mean, Liverpool was a city of a lot of social issues, but I've got. I mean, I don't hate Liverpool. I don't hate Scousers. I am part Scouse, I suppose. My dad's family, my granddad was born and raised in Liverpool, and my dad was, half Scouse. So there you go. Can't dislike them. Don't have to like them either. I don't dislike them. But there you go. Yeah, UFC and WWE basically merging together. I couldn't care less, really. Um, I think professional wrestling has gone downhill for a long time. It's not the product it was. I think the McMahon family has mismanaged, that promotion and that company so badly for about 25 years that it's now no longer in their hands. Um, um, UFC, Dana White, some of the antics of UFC and their employees, which is what their fighters are. I've got no time for it. I think Bellator is um, has a better reputation as a promotion. Um, UFC, I think, again, there's been a lot of negative headlines and a lot of scandal around that. They're two organisations that have merged together that have been followed by scandal for years. Yeah, League One again. It's ridiculous how congested it is there as well. The football league is ridiculous. They're so cutthroat because of the promotion relegation aspects to it, and the financial rewards and the financial penalties of relegation and promotion. It's just ridiculous. Do I think the Solway Sharks can get to the Elite Hockey League? Well, the Elite League, no. I would think the National League, possibly, um, as in the top level, with Basingstoke not being there. There's a better chance of having like some Scottish representation. Um, yes, maybe, possibly. Vince McMahon looked like a Cuban gangster, with the mustache. Um, Look, I think the way Dana White runs UFC and the way Vince McMahon has run WWE over many, many years, at some point, the controversy and the scandal would not be a positive in the fact that it draws attention to the product. And WWE has been declining for a long time, and some of the decision making has been really poor, um, really poor for a long, long time. UFC, so much controversy and scandal surrounding the UFC over such a long period of time. When you got people like Conor McGregor and the scandal and controversy and that surrounds them, which is representing your brand. Remember this: it's not just brand McGregor or brand Habib or Hasbullah or whatever UFC fighter or UFC personality we're talking about. That's their own individual brand, but they're also representing UFC as a brand. And when that brings negative publicity, negative PR, negative headlines associated with your promotion or your brand, it eventually will have a negative impact on the perception from sports fans and the general public and sponsors and investors, you know, uh, into that particular um, sporting body. I think we've seen that now with cricket, with the constant match fixing allegations and snooker. It's now having a negative impact upon a sport. Um, you know, the Italian football match fixing scandal had a massive knock on impact for Italian football for the best part of 2 decades. So when you have constant negative headlines, scandal, scandal after scandal, corruption allegations, which then end up being proven, individuals or teams found guilty of it, it has eventually, instead of drawing eyes to your product and interest, just a few bad headlines, no news is bad news, or only the only news is good news, basically. Um, yeah, we'll see. No, again, this is where I know it's professional wrestling, which is sports entertainment, which is different. But when you are, organising events, trying to get talent into your organisation, so see it like, the NHL, for example, raiding the European leagues for their best talent and drafting the best European players, or the NRL trying to attract the best Super League players to play in the NRL, or the best up and coming young talent like Dominic Young, for example, Huddersfield Giants to the NRL. When that pathway dries up, stops, and you're not attracting that talent into your organisation or league or sport, and you're attracting less of that talent and less of those marketable, talented athletes, um, yeah, that does become a bit of a problem. and that then impacts the interest. And what we've seen is rival promotions to WWE at various points have attracted the star talent. Now, okay, they may not have the same financial muscle that the McMahon family has, which is why these short little blips where Impact Wrestling or Ring of Honor or AEW, whatever, small little blips. But eventually, enough. It's like death by a thousand cuts. If you've got multiple rival promotions, which is ultimately a good thing, I think, because WWE, what they did was they absorbed them all. And when they defeated WCW, that's the moment I believe professional wrestling went downhill because you lost that rivalry, which was intensity with the ratings war. As soon as they absorbed basically the remains of WCW, they got the rest of the surviving wrestlers and they absorbed it, beat it basically. That's the moment I think professional wrestling went downhill. Could there be some sort of UFC WWE hybrid event? I hope not, because that would be hilariously cool. Because I trust the Khan family to run a sporting event or a sports team. Look, the Khan family can't even run Fulham and the Jacksonville Jaguars cleanly. They're being investigated for corruption. There are allegations of them being corrupt. So, I wouldn't trust the Khans to do that properly. They'll fuck it up somehow. I mean, but there are allegations about the Khan family and how they deal with player agents and backhanders and operating within certain rules and regulations. Yeah, no, the Khan, no. There's enough swirling around of a negative aspect about the Khans that raises questions about their integrity um, and their suitability to be team owners. Professional wrestling. I mean, look, I don't watch it anymore. I haven't for some time. I just lost interest in it. Uh, and that, I mean, I used to watch the Impact when it, you know, um, when it came along, um, and I lost interest in that because, again, that was another wrestling promotion that was run well initially and really grew rapidly, and then was really badly run for a couple of years, which killed it. Still going, it's just nowhere near the level of its peak. Ring of Honor's gone up and down. WCW gone. AEW's, I think, overhyped, and I don't think is actually as healthy as the Khan family are making out. And now we've seen the McMahon family basically sell out to Dana White and UFC, which says to me that the professional wrestling industry, sports entertainment, whatever you want to look at it, is not as healthy as it claims it is. And I have nothing against professional wrestling. I've got friends in there who wrestled on the independent circuit here in the UK, and who are still wrestling fans now in their 30s, like I am, late 30s. And for us, the Attitude Era WWF, as it was known, the Monday Night Wars with WCW was our youth. This was our entertainment in the evenings, in the summer, for example, with SummerSlam and WrestleMania, and then WCW Nitro and ECW and all that. This was our youth, and it was kind of that one bit of Americana we didn't mind, and the video games, and the T-shirts and the various bits. Yeah, it was fun. Um, and then it all went horribly wrong. And there was some, incidents like the Chris Benoit incident, and what happened there, and Eddie Guerrero's death, and a few other wrestlers passing away young, and some of the scandals that we now know were things that were going on that shouldn't have been going on at the time, that have now surfaced. Now we know about what was going on back in the 80s and the 90s. Okay, raise some eyebrows about what the negative aspects of the industry. But for me and my friends as kids growing up, we loved the stuff. looking back on it, I think, yeah, we don't obviously have the same view on what we grew up watching when we were kids and teenagers and all that. But I think decisions were made that were bad, poor decisions, and then we now know about certain things within the wrestling industry, which if that was a professional sport, we're talking about linked bans, we're talking about corruption allegations, we're talking about steroids bans, we're talking about you know massive scandal that would rock a professional sports league or a professional sports to the core and would ultimately damage fans turning their backs on it, going, well, this is just a complete and utter joke. I mean, look at the steroid scandal and the impact it's had on baseball over the last 20 years. It has had a noticeable impact over a long period of time, and baseball, I don't think, is fully recovered because of that steroid scandal. Um, the Lance Armstrong and Floyd Landis and all the doping in cycling has massively damaged the image of cycling, massively. As I said, with all the football match fixing scandals in Italy, Turkey, Germany, that has an impact. And then you have the Qatar World Cup and then the FIFA corruption. It's really angered a lot of fans and the Super League debacle, and that's really impacted the image of association football, professional football. And then you look at cricket, snooker with their match fixing allegations and individuals being caught doing it, and again it damages the image. Again, fans react by having less faith in what they're seeing, and is it fair sport? Is our matches being fixed? And there are some suspicious matches, and then so it does have a yeah, it is what it is. Yeah, I don't think wrestling's dead, but I think it's now facing a crossroads, which it hasn't faced for 30 years. And we can look back at the federal charges against Vince McMahon in the mid 90s, the steroids trial, and you know I think that's the moment when this is roughly at the same time baseball was having its steroid scandal as well. This was a big thing in America. Not only was professional wrestling under the spotlight for the use of steroids within the industry, within the WWF at the time, which is now WWE and WCW, but Major League Baseball was going through its steroid scandal, and the the damage that Major League Baseball is still recovering from, and to a certain extent, or to a massive extent, professional wrestling still trying to recover from, is the 90s, 2000s with steroid use and the implications and the legal implications for that. And then I go back to the Italian match fixing and the Turkish match fixing and all the various match fixing scandals in football, or matches, and then corruption scandals in football over the last 20, 30 years. It has a massive impact, a negative impact, where it's a death by a thousand cuts. So now fans are very cynical about what they're seeing. And then we look at the financial problems that rugby union's facing, and it has an impact. Negative headlines have an impact. Motorsport, F1 at the moment, there's some of the things that are going on in F1 over recent years is having a negative impact, I believe. People go, "What the viewership's is up and the money's up." It's like, yeah, it's the American market and the Asian market. European fans, I don't think, feel the same way. I think there's a narrative in the mainstream media that isn't the reality in real life. Um, obviously rugby leagues had salary cap scandals and steroid scandals and the peptide scandal and AF and then various individual players drugs and alcohol off field offences of various levels of constant off field scandals with players misbehaving and club directors misbehaving. it is death by a thousand cuts. And there has to come a point where, I mean, professional and Olympic sport, for example, there needs to be more transparency. There needs to be more accountability. And I think professional wrestling is exactly the same as professional sport. Um, the fact it has been rubbish is the damage done to the reputation of WWE and the other wrestling promotions as well, because of what happened in the 90s with the steroids trial and what happened in the 2000s with wrestlers dying young, high profile wrestlers, and then the Chris Benoit situation, how that was handled. And then subsequent events with other wrestlers as well, and what we now know about some of the negative side within the industry. Massive negative headlines. It massively impacts the public perception of your product. And now what we're seeing with the NFL, the NHL, rugby union, rugby league, with the CTE research, the CTE class action lawsuits that now the AFL has been dragged into as well. Do you think, Mrs. Jones is going to allow little Timothy to play? No. He'll get brain damage. Yeah. So that's where like some of these contact team sports, like Mrs. Jones is not allowing Timothy to play anymore because he might get his head bashed in. So now we're looking at athlete welfare more, which we weren't 20 years ago. Oh, he'll run that off. It's like the guy's just been knocked out. I know he'll run it off, but he's clearly concussed. He's clearly, no, he'll run it off. Now it's like you've got to come off the field, you've got to sit down, go in the quiet room, have the ding dong test. Oh, you failed your ding dong test. Your class as a category 2, 3, 1, whatever. And now we're seeing some sports and leagues bring in mandatory stand down periods for head injuries or injury. We weren't seeing that 10, 20 years ago. So, yeah, public perception has a lot to do with, positives. I would say now that the rugby league we're watching now, quality of the skill and the quality, and same with the ice hockey, quality of skill, the speed of the game, the collision is still as brutal as ever. I think it's better quality now than what it was 10, 20 years ago. The players are faster, quicker, bigger, stronger. The skill level's gone through the roof. Professional wrestling has been unpopular for so long now. No, I think I do think there's this, especially on social media with like Watch Mojo and Watch Mojo Wrestling and all that, and some of the wrestling YouTubers who think who keep peddling this narrative that wrestling has never been anything, never been healthier than it's ever have been. BS. My generation, I will say, people in their mid 30s to mid 40s grew up with the Attitude Era and the WrestleMania, as in at its peak in the 90s to the mid 2000s, mid 90s to mid 2000s. So my segment of society, basically, I call it, my age bracket, mid 30s, mid 40s. Yeah, we grew up with this. So basically, my friendship circle really, that's a fair portion of my friendship circle. I don't see as many teenagers and younger kids wearing WWE or like, Impact Wrestling T-shirts. When I go like to Costco with my mum, you'll still have I don't see as much WWE or Impact or AEW products for sale that I used to, and that's the same when I go shopping, for example, in a bigger department store. I occasionally do that. I don't see it because I obviously collect sports memorabilia. I just don't see it. I don't see people wearing it. I don't see the products for sale, the adverts anymore. Well, I remember the WWE, WWF, I'm that old, advertising on British TV. Buy this toy. from XYZ, let's say Smith's toy shops or what was Toys R Us, and they would advertise it. Uh, I don't, I don't see. So I'm not seeing the younger, like the teenagers wearing the wrestling t-shirts like my generation did. I'm not seeing the advertising of the product like my generation was exposed to. And when I walk past, like, because when I walk past a shop window, let's say it's a toy shop, I'm not seeing it advertised. I'm not seeing the product. I'm not seeing when I walk past a video game store, like Game or an independent video game store. I'm not seeing the latest SmackDown versus Raw video game. I'm not seeing 2K title. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it advertised as much. I'm not seeing the adverts online when I'm watching a YouTube video. The ads come up. I'm not seeing the WWE or the Ring of Honor or the AEW or the Impact Wrestling being advertised as much, if at all. And that's a big thing. I'm not seeing those ads hit me. Now, that could be because of the content I do, the content I watch has a bearing on the algorithm and what YouTube goes, I want you to see this, or Twitter says, I want you to see this. And it's very striking, very striking. Um, Whether it's right for a comeback, I don't know. But maybe the commercial and damage has been done. Maybe it's less fashionable now, like uncool. Like fashions change. Remember that fashions do change. You know, so like rugby league, the crowd numbers for rugby league were much higher 25, 30 years ago than they are now. So sports fandom changes. But yeah, I think the women's game has come on leaps and bounds. I think again that's been driven by the game in Australia, the NRLW. Um, but it has come on leaps and bounds. It's still semi-pro at best. The women's game in Australia is far ahead of what it is here um, in England. Um, some clubs do draw crowds, but I think the St Helens winning the World Club Challenge has been a positive. For all the slagging off St Helens got from the Australian media during the COVID pandemic period, well, that's two fingers to them. Mostly to do with a few YouTubers and a few people with mainstream media were giving it all back. They're crap. They beat possibly one of the best teams we've ever seen in Penrith. Um, that was, I think, rubbed their noses in a little bit. But if that game was played 10 times, I think Penrith win 8, maybe 7 or 8 out of 10. St Helens win 2 of those games. So if St Helens and Penrith are the World Cup Challenge next season, we'll see what happens there. Yeah, I saw a few kids, I saw a few teenagers today on my way home wearing NBA merchandise, Air Jordans, hats. Some of them may be wearing it just as a fashion statement. But I've got a lot of Yankees. I've got some Yankees baseball caps. I don't like baseball, but I like the NY Yankees logo because it's a fashion statement. But I think that's where Nike, with their Air Jordan subsidiary, market themselves very well, especially with the film that's coming out. I think that's where certain teams, again, market themselves very successfully. Same, with the ML. I saw one of my neighbours got a Chicago Bulls jacket. Doesn't even watch basketball. Just likes the jacket, right? Bomber jacket, right? So this is where I think certain leagues have got their marketing right, and this is where the NBA overtook the NHL in the last 30 years. Was they got their marketing strategy right, and it started with the Air Jordans, ironically. Bearing in mind, the NHL's had like the Gretzky and Lemieux. They could have really marketed those two a lot better than they did. That's where the NBA won that little battle in the Big Four of the major leagues, and this is where the NBA overtook the NHL. in the 80s and 90s was the Chicago Bulls, Space Jam, Michael Jordan. Now, yes, we had the Mighty Ducks film, and we got a hockey team out of it, the NHL, in Anaheim. But I think Space Jam was better marketed at the time by Warner Brothers than the Mighty Ducks film was by Disney. And because of that marketing and then the soundtrack and actually, really giving Michael Jordan a big segment of acting as well, uh, more so than Gretzky in the Mighty Ducks franchise, two of the biggest, most marketable athletes out of North America at the time. The NBA won the marketing war, really got into the hearts and minds of not only North Americans, Europeans, and Australians, and New Zealanders. They really sold the NBA not only and beat the NHL to the domestic market of the overseas market. And that's where the NBA gets a lot of its merchandise sales from, is from overseas. Yeah, they don't get paid a lot. They get paid pennies. And the injuries they sustain and the brutality of their sport, women's rugby league, is ridiculous. I have to admit that. It is ridiculous. They need to be better compensated for that. Can the game, can the sport afford it, though? That's the problem. Can the sport afford it? Because rugby league doesn't have centralised contracts like rugby union for the women, and they they play for the love of the game. They play for the love of the game, but they need to be better compensated. I'm not saying paid in the same amount as the men. Not saying that they need to be better compensated. Yeah, I know it's women's rugby super league, rugby league. Yes, I know that. The women's super league in football, the women's football's professional now. The women's rugby league is they're not they're not paid enough for their match fees. Considering some of their full time, some of them are actually full time employed, and they have to work around their training and playing around their job. And when they're injured while playing, they can't do their job. That's including like broken legs, dislocations, concussions, broken ribs, internal injuries, all that, which you do get. I know players who've had lacerated kidneys, livers, ruptured spleens. That's the men's game. Yeah, this is where they need to at least raise the match fee. And I think this is where the RFL needs to step in, and try and work out a better payment structure for appearance fees, because that's just not enough. And I don't think the game can afford it. That's the problem. Um, Rugby league as an international game and as a domestic game does not have the same money as rugby union. But rugby union's got money problems. That's the ironic thing. Rugby league, ironically, while it has money problems, ironically the money problems are less severe. But yeah, women's rugby league, they're not paid enough for match appearance fees. They sacrifice so much to play for the love of the game. I think that's why I think women's rugby league is very entertaining, because it is for the love of the game that they play. And they don't shirk away from the contact. Um, they really they hurt each other. Let's be honest. Rugby league is one of the most brutal contact sports going out there. Um, I think it's more brutal than American football. I think it's up there with ice hockey, with the collision and the speed of the collision, and the force behind the collision, if not more so, because there's no protective equipment really. You might wear small pads and a scrum cap, but in reality, it's body on body collision contact, um, and that's got brutal. So I, I would argue that yes, they need to get paid more. Whether the game can afford to give them at least 80, 150, 200 quid per game, 350 per week, 400 per week. so they can be classed as really semi-pro at that point. Um, it's it, hopefully at some point the sport can. Um, but yeah, they sacrifice a lot, they dedicate a lot, and it is brutal. And the same debate's been had in Australia and New Zealand with the NRLW as well, and trying to sort out with the ongoing CBA negotiations in regards to the NRL and the Rugby League Players Association in Australia and New Zealand. One of the arguments is the women's game needs a CBA as well and needs a league minimum salary as well, so the women can be fully professional and get paid. So that is a debate that's being had on the other side of the world right now is fairly compensating the players. Some of the players are full time and professional, not all. It is a brutal sport, absolutely brutal sport. Um, the difference is the NRL can afford to support the women's players more than Rugby League Super League here in Europe. That is the difference. Is there is that financial ability because of the income of the sport, the TV deal being worth $1 billion Australian dollars, which is about 660, 700 million pounds a year. Yeah, no, the league can afford the sport in Australia and New Zealand can afford to support the women's game more than the sport can hit. And that's a debate that's raging down in Australia right now with the RLPA and the NRL still not fully agreeing on the CBA. So we could see a player strike or lockout at some point. Now, the women's season, I think, starts in June. We've got about 2 months till the women's league season starts in the rugby league. State of origin as well. And then there's the debate about, origin match fees. And when you represent your state in state of origin, the match fees there as well. That's an important question. That's important. The fact that they're getting paid so little to basically bash each other. And some of the injuries. I mean, look at a player like Andrew Fafita, and I put this out there. He would have required 12 surgeries in order to play this season. 12 surgeries to continue his career. His body is ruined. Major League Baseball last year, to the beginning of this year. Major League Baseball last year. Ended in April last year. 3-month lockout. Went from Christmas 2021, or just my birthday in 2021, December, through till March, something like that. Major League Baseball was the last lockout. So only 12 months ago. 12, 13 months ago. The one before that, I believe, was the NHL lockout, I think, in 2013, 2012 time. And the one before that was the 2011 NBA lockout. I think the NFL, there's been a lot in my lifetime. I need to, I think it's the difference. We really want our female football players to get fairly paid. American NBA fans begrudge women NBA players receiving a decent salary, and the NBA has so much money. The thing is that they go on economics because they go on the economic side of it. And what I find really interesting about American sports and the American sports model is they can't stand ads on jerseys. 3 of the 4 major leagues have a salary cap system, which would appear to be quite a socialist way of looking at it. They don't like ads on jerseys. They can't cope with that, and they have a salary cap system. Yet they're the most capitalist society in the world. Let that sink in. Yeah, we've been used to having advertising on jerseys for 30, 40 years. Our salary in Europe, we don't really have salary caps. It's more of a recent thing, predominantly in rugby union, to a certain extent rugby league and ice hockey. Yeah, they try. So we really don't have wage constraints on our sports. Our jerseys are covered in advertising, yet we are considered commies by Americans because we have social welfare. Um, no, that's thinking. They confuse socialism with social welfare. Again, Americans not being well educated. North Americans are panicking about having one advert on a jersey, on a nice hockey jersey. They have salary caps, so that's wage control. Very anti-capitalist, that isn't it? They can't cope with it. Can't cope with it. They can't cope with ads on jerseys. They have a salary cap. They can't cope with having no salary cap. Yet the most capitalist society on earth. Let that sink in. But no, the women's NBA just barely makes a profit, and it's taken 20 years to get to that point. Now, crowd numbers are decent. That's the thing. It's a decent level of basketball. I'm not saying it's not good quality sport, but again, this is again. I think it's the social media knuckle draggers, and yeah, and we're starting to see it in sport here as well, because they try and compare it to the men's rather than watching it as women's sport, as like. I always say this to people who watch women's rugby league or ice hockey or rugby union or football for the first time. Don't compare it to the men's equivalent. It's completely different. Especially women's ice hockey's got different rules, and women's rugby league in Australia and New Zealand, the NRLW games 10 minutes shorter. Women's rugby union's got slightly different. It's got rule variations. It's rugby league. So stop comparing it to the men's game. Treat it as a different sport that you're watching for the first time, please. What I find funny is they will a lot of them will be men, and they will criticise the women, ironically, who would school them on a football field or rugby, but they would embarrass them badly, by the way. And a lot of them are middle aged, and they feel threatened. Um, yeah, I think yeah, a lot of it is to support yeah, is subsidised. And when it comes to the club gaming, especially in English football, the men's side of it makes such a profit that they can afford to subsidise the women's side of things. Um, but the crowd numbers are starting to be encouraging, and the atmosphere of games, there's not the hooligan element, so it's more family friendly, which is something that men's football and to a certain extent men's rugby league as well is losing, is that family element where the wife and kids can come along without having bricks and bottles and punches thrown, and abusive, racist, homophobic, sexist chanting. Um, so it's a more family-friendly atmosphere, which actually makes money. You can attract Mrs. Jones to bring, Timothy and Samantha along. You've just sold 4 tickets rather than one. You just sold a family package, which is actually worth more money than 4 blokes, on the mates, four, actually a family package, because they're going to come back again and again and again. But those 4 blokes know, we can only afford to go to 2 games this season. You get repeat customers who come more regularly, which in the long run actually makes you more money. Short term, not so much, but long run it does. And then little Timothy and little Samantha end up becoming players. Timothy might become a superstar. Samantha might go on to represent the national side as well. Very marketable. You make money. Like they sell your product. It's a thing. It's a thing. When you can attract the families, especially the wife and kids, to come to games, rather than just the father taking his son, but guess what? The wife and daughter have come as well. Suddenly, you got 2 new fans. It'd just be father son otherwise. That's just 2 fans. Now you've got 4 fans. So you've got a bigger marketing base where you can sell your merchandise, not 2 people, but 4 people. Let that sink in. And then when Timothy and Samantha have kids, and get married, or bring their partners along because they may have whatever. Suddenly, you've multiplied your fan base by making your product family friendly. It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing how just a little bit of positivity sell your product without having to spend bonkers amount on advertising. By making the atmosphere family friendly, in the long run, you get more fans. Having family stand, family zones, it's just madness. I wouldn't say all across Europe it's subsidised. Some of the European leagues are actually quite financially well off. What you don't realise is the club dynamic in Europe is the sports club where the members have a big say in it. So Barcelona, Real Madrid, famous for their football clubs. Panathinaikos and Olympiacos in Greece, famous for their football clubs. Very successful basketball teams. Um, very successful handball teams. I mean, what is it? TPS in Finland. Ice hockey, bandy, and basketball. Winners in all three. Um, so the multi-sports club is a continental European thing, Scandinavian and Mediterranean thing, really. And they still get good crowd numbers for basketball and handball and bandy and roller hockey in Spain and Portugal as well. So it's not as much subsidy as you think, because it's the sports club as a whole. They'll always have the same sponsors and they'll have the same ownership, maybe. So it's not just the football subsidising the basketball. It's under the same umbrella, just different arms of the club. It just so happens that Barcelona is more famous for its football club, for example, as is Panathinaikos and Olympiacos. But they actually have the basketball side as well, or roller hockey side, or whatever the other sport may be, or the gymnastics club, or the tennis club, whatever it may be. But football generates the most income, but isn't the sole income maker for said sports club. The top European basketball league is Europe League. When the teams make a profit, the teams are above Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, and Fenerbahce. Guess what? All those clubs, the fans and members. But you know that they don't have independent owners. The fans and members. The fans are the majority stakeholders in all four of those clubs. That's why they don't have to make a profit, because the fans own it. The profits go back to the fans anyway, with cheaper tickets, cheaper merchandise. There you go. They can that's, you see what I mean? Bayern Munich. You can watch a Bayern Munich game, football game, for like €30. No, that's not good. Well, right now Barcelona's making no money because they are 1.3 billion euros in debt. So let that sink in. Well, in Barcelona's case, they'll rather pay off the referees so they can win trophies. So that's where all their profits have gone, into bribery. But no, yeah, they're more famous for their footballing arms of the club, which then raises the question about actually how profitable are these sports clubs? Because yes, they are reliant on the footballing arm. In other cases, in Scandinavia, they might be reliant on the ice hockey arm, for example, like Frölunda, or I think it's is it TFS or, or TPS or something? There's a Finnish team which is a multi-sports club which has a football club as well, ironically. But their most profitable one is their ice hockey team, followed by their basketball and bandy teams. And it's mad. But in saying that, the four clubs that were mentioned, the fans are the owners because they're not. Their ownership model is different than having a wealthy millionaire or billionaire bankrolling the club. the fans voting club presidents. That's the difference. Bayern Munich is the 50+1 rule, so the fans have a say in how the club is run. But Fenerbahce, Real Madrid, and Barcelona are basically owned by the fans. So it doesn't matter if the club's making a loss or a profit, because then we have the presidential election going, well, this president, under this presidency of this president board, the club's made a loss this year. We're going to vote him or her out and elect a candidate who can make a profit again, whilst also maintaining success of our various sports teams in the leagues they participate in, and make sure that our players are paid on time, and that club facilities are kept up to standards, and that we get our dividend. That's how it works. Would you consider Leeds Rhinos to be a multi-sports club, rugby league, women, netball, wheelchair? I would say it's interesting because Headingley is used for 3 sports: league, rugby union, and cricket. Because you've got the multi-sports complex with the cricket ground and the rugby union, rugby league ground. I would say they're a rugby league club, which has also got a netball arm. So yes, they are a multi-sports club because 2 sports are played. Because rugby league, the 3 wheelchair, the disability, women's and men's, that's the rugby league club. The netball is the netball club. So it's Leeds Rhino Sports Club, really, it should be. Or just Leeds Rhinos. So yes, it is a multi-sports club because 2 sports are played. 3 variants of one sport and 1 variant of another sport. There you go. It's a multi-sport club. By definition, more than 2 sports are played. There you go. You've got Paralympic sport, technically, with the wheelchair rugby league, netball, and rugby league for both men and women, where the rules are exactly well. And there's rule variations. So yes, it is a multi-sport club. The fact they've decided to go down the netball route, which is normally a university thing where the clubs are formed surrounding a core of university, and now they're behind it. There you go. It shows how seriously that netball's now been taken. No, not really. It's not an Australian model. It is still a European model, I would say, because the Australian model is based on our model, really, to a certain extent. But no, it's now, you could say the Leeds Rhinos as a brand is now a multi-sports club. I just find it interesting that Leeds United and Leeds Knights Ice Hockey Club aren't all owned by the same people, like one owner owning all the clubs in Leeds. That would be very interesting dynamic. It wouldn't happen, obviously, because football and rugby league are trying to, and ice hockey all trying to compete with the same fans, and they've got 3 different ownership groups owning 3 different professional sports teams in Leeds. And then you've got the Leeds Carnegie, who I believe may be owned by the same people who own the Leeds Rhinos, ironically. I think. Maybe wrong on that. You maybe at the yeah, could argue. Without then, look, at the end of the day, that also means possible secondary revenue stream for these teams. So yeah, you could say it's a multi-sports club. And if Warrington have also got a handball team, then that's a multi-sports club as well. We're starting to see a change in the sporting dynamic of some of these teams. But again, because it's at community level rather than at professional level, could you truly argue that's a professional sports club or just the community club attached to the professional sports club? That's the difference there. It's interesting, but it's a difference. But no, it is interesting. But I mean, look, the fact that the Leeds Rhinos organisations put so much money into the redevelopment of Headingley and their netball programme is a positive, I think, for Leeds as a city. The Leeds Knights with the ice hockey and how that's developed in the last 5-6 years, I think, is a positive for the city. Um, and Leeds is a sports-mad city. I think it's positive that we're seeing growth and investment in community level sport as well as professional sport as well, because it provides employment for people. This is what not just the athletes, but the people like the backroom staff, the arena staff, club shop, the maintenance side of things. It creates investing in your infrastructure creates employment opportunities for people, and it, then it has a positive impact for the local community. So what's happening in Leeds should be replicated around the country by some other sports teams. Um, it's Studies have proven that when sports teams invest in growing their imprint in the local community, has a positive impact for communities. And when they take pre-season games to surrounding areas, for example, it attracts interest, has a positive impact on the community for a social level, to an economic level. Um, so there is that as well. Studies have proven that making sport more accessible to people has a positive impact on communities. There you go. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for all your questions this evening. Appreciate it, and I'll have some more content for you very, very soon. So, goodbye from me.